This roundtable, entitled Where Our Story Starts, Come From Away and a Wedding Party Looks Back, is presented as part of Wayne Pop 2021, Disruptions, Gaps, Transitions, and Leaps.
Hi, my name is Trinidad Linares. I'm the music library associate at Bowling Green University. I have an MA in popular culture. And popular culture for Bowling Green is different from popular culture from Birmingham, UK. Those are the two areas that split up. Popular culture. The UK version is sort of more like a battlefield thing. It's sort of like a class war, race, those things, you know, black versus white and stuff like that. For Bowling Green, it's more, popular culture is more day-to-day life as people lived it. And that's kind of why I want to put this roundtable together, because it is a mix of international, national events, but also how daily life gets represented in relation to those events.
I'm Tom Edge. I'm an associate teaching professor in the Department of Ethnic Studies at Bowling Green State University. Most of my research tends to focus on African-American history and culture, especially late 19th century through mid 20th century. But for purposes of this panel, I'm coming at this mostly from the perspective of microhistory, which I'll discuss a lot more later, as well as autoethnography. My previous research has mainly focused on Black higher education, Black leadership, and also the rise of what I would consider neo-lynching imagery in the 21st century. My current research project is actually an offshoot of that in terms of looking at lynching history from the ground up, with a main focus on the aftermath of the lynching and how the local communities, families, etc., responded in terms of the care they give to the deceased. I'm currently on FIL this year, working on a project with regard to that, and hope to publish on that in the next year or two. Jim, do you want to introduce yourself?
Well, hello, I'm Jim Walton. Primarily a singing actor by trade, also at times dancer and a writer. I've lived in New York City now for 42 years and change, and done a bunch of Broadway shows, a few off-Broadway shows, and some tours, and done my best to keep busy, and for the most part have been busy. When I'm not working, it's big business trying to get a job. So, but I've been very fortunate, and I'm thrilled to be a part of this roundtable. I'm sure I'm leaving all kinds of things out, but it's a very broad topic, but just thrilled to be here.
All right, let's start with, where were you on 9/11?
Well, on September 11th, 2001, it was, of course, Tuesday, I was on my first day of jury duty. So I was downtown in the Wall Street area, I'd say maybe about a half mile from the towers. And so I was in the big jury room. If you've ever done jury duty, you meet in this big room where all of the possible jurors sit, and then they go off to separate courtrooms to be questioned and possibly become a juror. Well, I was sitting in that room. Should I tell this story? I can tell it in about a minute's time. Should I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was sitting in the big room, and a woman came in and sat to my immediate left, and she was shaken up. She was shaken, and I said, "Are you all right?" She says, "I don't know. A plane just flew into one of the trade towers." I said, "A plane? Was it a crop duster from New Jersey or something?" I just couldn't comprehend it, as many couldn't. And she said, "No, I think she had seen the impact." She said, "No, it had to have been a bigger craft." And within a few minutes, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, someone had turned on a television in a little anteroom just off the big room. And it was not even cable television. I think it was NBC or CBS, coming through like with rabbit ears. It was so primitive. And we saw the North Tower had been hit. And then within minutes, the South Tower was hit. And we campaigned to the jury captain to be released. And she wasn't going to let us go. No, you're here for jury duty. Yes, but New York City is under attack. And finally, we all kind of ganged up on her and just said, we're leaving. And we all basically left. And I'll never forget her shouting, but I'll see you all here tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. And I remember turning back and looking at her. I knew even then, no, something's not right here. Because we didn't have any information. So anyway, then I went outside and I had a camera with me. I carried the camera in my backpack. Now, of course, we all have cameras on our phones, but I took pictures of the North Tower and saw it fall. And yeah, it was a hell of a day. So to be down there, I'm never down there, but I was there on jury duty and so strange. It was a surreal day. So I was in New York City on 9/11. That's my answer.
You want me to handle ours or?
Well, we had separate ones, didn't we?
Yes, where were you?
Technically.
I was at work and I had a cold and I was supposed to go to lunch because it was the last day of work before wedding day, or not last day of work before we leave for the wedding. So that was mine. Mine was pretty short.
And where did you work, Trinidad?
I worked in New Jersey. At the time, I was working at a medical publishing company.
Okay.
So
wow.
I had dropped her off at work that morning in Chatham, and I was going to take the car and run some errands before I came back to get her later in the day. And the things that stood out, I remember it being a beautiful morning.
Oh, it's a gorgeous day. Yes.
Yeah, we had a tape and we were listening to ABBA on the way there. It was just a beautiful Tuesday, and I dropped her off, and as I'm leaving the parking lot, I turned the radio on, and that was when I think this was probably a few minutes after the second tower had been hit, and I hear what's going on in New York, and I can kind of trace the rest of my morning between what I'm hearing on the radio, who I'm trying to contact, and then which wedding errand I'm running. I maybe 2 miles away from her office when I couldn't get cell phone reception, because especially back then, a lot of the cell phone receptions for New Jersey was routed through Lower Manhattan, and it was like nothing. So I pulled over, got on there was a payphone from an abandoned gas station. I called and said, do you have the radio on? Yeah, we've got it on. And after I got back on the road, I tried calling my office. I finally got through there, made sure all of our people were safe, because I worked at a law firm in Newark, and a lot of times we had people going into Lower Manhattan on business. Sure. Everyone was accounted for. I was on the road there on the way to get our marriage certificate when I heard that the Pentagon got hit. And as it happens, the woman behind the counter who was helping me get the certificate, she had, I think, a niece who worked in the Pentagon, so she was trying to get information. And then from there, it's first tower goes down, going to get the programs for the wedding. Going back towards the apartment, second tower goes down. I finally get home, and that was the first time I got to turn on TV and actually see what was happening.
Wow. It's so interesting, isn't it? And people listening and watching this roundtable will have their own stories. Everybody has their 9/11 story. Like, I can hear someone talk about, well, I saw the second tower fall, et cetera, and it's like, oh, I know where I was when the North Tower fell. I know where I was when the South Tower. It's like, oh, that's where I fit into their puzzle piece. It's almost like I feel like we're all trying to connect through that tragic day to come together somehow. It's as you're talking about preparing for your wedding, which of course I was at. It's wow, what a memory to attach to your wedding preparations. And my younger brother Bob and his wife Lori, their wedding anniversary is September 11th.
Oh,
they were married on that day. So in 1982. So their 19th wedding anniversary was 9/11. The numbers 1991. Anyway, it's fascinating.
So do you want to go into how macro and micro history work?
Sure. So when we previously kind of talked about this, we had presented on our wedding at a conference here at BGSU marking the 15th anniversary of 9/11. And we used our wedding as a jumping off point for talking about how microhistory can be applied to look at these huge events. And in looking at it, I think we can draw a lot on people like Giovanni Levi, who describes microhistory as this process of bringing reality to how we talk about history. That instead of just talking about history in terms of these huge systems, that he says it makes more sense to look at how do everyday people interact with those systems. It can be in ways that support that system. It can be in ways that challenge it. It can be in ways that complicate our understanding of it. But the vast majority of what we can tell in history is really how everyday people are surviving in these circumstances that they didn't create. In other historians like David Bell have kind of added to that. And when David Bell looks at microhistory, he divides it into two. He calls it microhistory of the extraordinary versus microhistory of the ordinary. With microhistory of the extraordinary, he's concentrating on events that maybe in their own time, this was a big deal, and then we kind of forget about it. Or maybe it's something where you see a big act of resistance in the midst of a larger system. Let's say like a local sit-in movement in the midst of Jim Crow. For him, that's microhistory of the extraordinary. You're not concentrating necessarily on the huge system itself, but those acts of resistance within it. But then it looks at microhistory of the ordinary, which is much more a slice of everyday life, how everyday people are responding and reacting to all of these things that are happening around them. And for me, that's really what I like to focus on when I think about how to contextualize, say, our wedding, not just through us, but through people like you, Jim, other folks who were there, who participated in it, and then how all of our stories come together. Because that process, then you can kind of piece together, oh, well, how did it differ for you being in New York City that day? How did it differ for some people based on their identities, their religion, their race, their immigration status, any number of things? How does geography play a role? How does it affect our friends who are in Canada trying to get here for the wedding versus those who are in Boston? There's so many different little stories you can bring together that then give us that insight into everything that was happening that day, that week, and then in the months and years to come.
Sure, you're very, astute about these things, but yeah, that's exactly what I was saying, or in part what I was saying is that we all have our little micro histories of that day, for instance. I didn't do anything extraordinary that day, except jury duty was a little odd because it's rare, but it's not extraordinary, and yet what happened that day is locked in my mind like it was a red letter day. I have really not much to add to what you said very, very well.
Actually, I wanted to tie in
Yes, please.
I think between your experience also, and then now you're also in Come From Away. I think Come From Away is the micro extraordinary or extraordinary history bit, isn't it? Yeah,
it definitely could be microhistory of the extraordinary, because in 2001 too, there were so many articles coming out about, well, what happened to the planes that were rerouted, and there were some great stories coming out, especially about those that went to Eastern Canada. And Come From Away then kind of, it reminds people who may be a little further removed from it, hey, this was pretty important at the time. Let's center that again. That where you're
that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
So then Jim, how is that working with your personal experience and then also being on this show?
Meaning, how does my memories of 9/11 or
how so does that call, so you've talked before about how certain things can influence how you perform, and is there any way that had you not been a New Yorker, this wouldn't have ticked certain boxes? Because I mean, I lived in New York briefly, but I was mostly in New Jersey, but I did live in the metro area, and sort of even that, that minuscule thing of like the guy was allowed to take other people's barbecues was like a really strange thing that you would never do as a New Yorker.
Oh, heavens no.
Yeah, so that kind of the not you but you kind of in the middle of that.
Sure. Well, for me, in brief, I don't think about my experience on September 11th much while performing the show, because I'm playing Nick Marson, an English oil guy who was flying to Dallas, and so he wasn't a New Yorker, and his story is completely different from mine. And Doug, the air traffic controller in Gander, is completely different from mine. So I kind of have to inhabit these different characters. But underneath all of that is, yes, I know I was here. I'm a proud New Yorker. I was down there, so it's built on that rock, that foundation of that. But the characterizations aren't really built on my experience on 9/11, really. There are a couple of moments where I remember it. So like when all the passengers finally get off the plane and they go into the airport and they want to know what's going on. And they say, you can look at these two televisions in the cafeteria. And so we watch and we sing this little prayer, lead us out of the darkness. And then at the end of it, short moment, we see something that we just can't look at, whether it's an impact of a plane hitting a building or a building falling. They don't say what it is in the show, but that moment is kind of, I'm back there looking at the North Tower again. So there are moments, but for the most part, it's not that for me, but still mighty and emotional, and but it's good to have that in my hip pocket, those memories, because they're profound.
I know a lot of the Come From Away cast members on Broadway at some point have been able to go to Newfoundland to meet some of the people that inspired the show. Have you been able to participate in that? And if so, what was it like?
You know what? I haven't. Doggone it. No, I have not.
Complain today.
Yeah, I gotta call somebody. Hold on. No, the original cast went and performed the show in the hockey rink, which was a refrigerator that week of 9/11. They stored food in it because they had to have food to feed these 7,000 people. But then when Come From Away was done, the original cast went and performed 2 performances for the citizens of Gander, and who went nuts. I was not there for that because I was a replacement. But no, I have not been. I've never been to Gander or Newfoundland, and I would love to go, and I intend to go one day.
You have met Nick, though, haven't you?
I've met Nick Marson and Diane. I've met them. Beverly Bass, the pilot, Claude, the mayor. I've met, and Kevin Turf. I've met a few of the originals, a good number of them. And they'll probably be here on September 21st. If I know them, they'll be back for our opening night, September 21st. Yeah, it's pretty thrilling to be a part of it. It's huge because of the devastation of that day, and yet the message of generosity and kindness, and to be a part of that is like no other show I've been in. As much as I love Guys and Dolls or Bye Bye Birdie or She Loves Me, it's to have to be a part of almost a political or a spiritual social comment or movement. It's really profound. I can't think of another musical I've done quite like that. Never really. So it's really cool.
I think it's also like one of the few pop culture things from 9/11 that didn't go the dark negative way. Like if most of the movies that came out were like the Hard Edge movie, where it was the sad heroic movie. It was like Come From Away is about community. And also if you look at television after 9/11, you see like the anti-hero rise, things like television shows like House, TV shows like 24. It all sort of dug deep into how dark it can be. It's weird because like our television went more dark and kind of anti-Muslim in some ways. And just across the border in Canada, they had a show Little Mosque on the Prairie, which is about this like middle of nowhere Canada, where we learned about Muslims and that they're not so bad. And it was just it's this weird, like if you were watching television shows next to each other, 24 and Little Mosque, you'd have that weird dichotomy.
Yeah.
Ironically, one of the actors who was in Little Mosque ended up getting a job in 24 as a terrorist.
There you go. Versatile.
So I think the idea of community and
that's the beauty of, I think, Come From Away in part is the Canadian philosophy, which is these people in Newfoundland grew up in a community and evolved in this community where times were really tough. And so they relied on each other and helped each other because they knew that they were going to need somebody helping them next week, next month. And I think it's part of their ethos. And I think it's also part of all of our ethos. I think it's a human quality, but the Canadians are, and I've worked in Toronto, it's a different feeling there. And also a great sense of humor. It's not just helpful people who are just kind and help you, but they're really, really ironic and very, very funny people. And that's in Come From Away. I think there's a lot of hilarious stuff in the show and people forget how funny it is. So yeah, it's a really unique show. They really pulled it off. They really did. I don't know how they did it. I'm a writer. I'm like, how do they do this? Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Well, Trent, did you want to go into a little more detail in terms of pop culture post 9/11? You started talking about it here. What else stands out to you kind of about that landscape immediately after 9/11 in terms of how we were processing it, whether it was the direct ones like the movies about 9/11 that we saw, or the ones that you can see are kind of riffing off of it and just talking more about kind of the feelings that we've had.
So there's dark, and then there went some fluffy shows that were completely disconnected from 9/11 and everything. We kind of, there was a weird sort of rollback in terms with 9/11 and pop culture. So you'd have that, but some shows played with that and did a better job than others. And one of the ones I thought was interesting was Pushing Daisies, where it did kind of do a kind of vintage look on things, but then it also talked about death. It was a murder mystery show, and so that kind of played with that too. But like the in between is kind of another thing that we look at more in terms of 9/11 and popular culture of being not sure where you are and trying to figure out where that is, and kind of. So that's the other kind of that I don't think we did have in other pop culture time periods, because if it was war was elsewhere. But here, since it was home, that's connection and that feeling of not being able to find home is a thing.
With Pushing Daisies, you mentioned the vintage look and feel that they had. Why do you think that matters? Whether it's for Pushing Daisies or anything else pop culture going on at that time?
Well, there were some political policies, some of which we're now seeing again, or have never come back with a vengeance. Where it was a weird, almost 1950s, like go back to the home, don't for women. There's a bit of silencing about women talking. Like you see this with women writers, like Susan Faludi and others, where they're questioning things or asking of things they weren't allowed to ask them or shouldn't be asking them. And Pushing Daisies was it made itself look like a cute show, but that was asking things it shouldn't be asking. So,
yeah, I don't know Pushing Daisy. I know the title, but I'm bad as a television watcher. I'm not very good at it. But I don't know pop culture like you two do, but there were changes I saw in the theater happen with, never mind just jukebox musicals. It just seemed to be, it got lighter and just seemed to be attracting the tourist dollar more around, like Mamma Mia almost really started it. And I liked Mamma Mia. That was 99 that was like kind of the classic jukebox musical that was really successful. I wondered how much Broadway changed was in part due to terror. I don't know. It's hard for me to know, but all those jukebox musicals and all those musicals made from movies, you know what I mean? That really ticked off a bunch of them in the 2000s, and then the 2010s, there were a lot more of them. 9 to 5, Legally Blonde, Big Fish, just countless movies that were made into musicals. To me, that's, I can't draw a conclusion about it, but I've seen it.
Right, that's what I'm saying. It was like the fluffy spectacle kind of thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that balances sort of out with movies, with Marvel movies went like this. Like,
oh yeah, it's a comic.
It was like 2 or 3, and then after post 9/11, it just went up, and we were always saving New York or something that looked like New York.
Some huge catastrophe.
Yeah. So, and I think that's like that whole thing of trying to, in some ways, trying to make things better, rewrite how things were, rewrite a happier story.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I think part of the problem with for Broadway, the fact that it was all these spectacles that were all coming just from movies themselves, because there's with Broadway before, there's always a mix. There's always something from somewhere else that isn't a movie and isn't just copied onto a musical usually.
Sure. Right.
And
book, original story, or
right, or there's some sort of adaptation to it. But these were almost like Xeroxes, weird way.
Well, they almost have to be. That's the thing. I remember years ago auditioning a couple of times for the musicalization of Singing in the Rain, and I remember thinking, I don't want to book this. I don't want to compete with Gene Kelly or Donald O'Connor because I can't. I can't do what they did. And I'm sure every other critic would say, well, he's no Gene Kelly, but he's doing a good job. It's like you have to live up to an expectation. And it's just, that's the way it is. But yeah, it's interesting. I think that it might have, the Broadway pop culture may have changed in large part due to terrorism, to 9/11.
So it seems like both of you are describing like people taking solace in the familiar.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Whether it's, we're going to repackage the songs of your youth and put it on stage and you can sing along in the audience.
Yeah, nostalgia is a very comforting. I have nostalgic thoughts. Now I'm 66 years old, and I catch myself going, Jim, you just were lost in nostalgia of your life. You were thinking of what it was like to be 30 again, you know, like, all right, well, but it's a very powerful force. And if you can embody that in a show and people want to see it, well, it works, you know. And I saw Mamma Mia ready to hate it. I was ready to, like a lot of my theater friends didn't like it. And I thought, all right, I'm not going to like this. And then at the end, I kind of thought, you know, they really they did a great job. I felt it was a good story and I cared about the characters and I tapped my toes and I liked the songs. And so there you go.
I remember the review that was Ben Brantley that called it a cupcake, but he loved it anyway.
Yeah, no, that's very good. You remember. I don't remember that.
He's like, he was like, he really, like the review, it was almost like somebody who had been on a diet. He's just like, he's like, yes, it's sugary, it's a cupcake. He's like, but we really need it right now.
Yeah, it was really good. But I think that opened in 99. Because reading about it recently. So it was right around the time of 9/11. And it ran how long on Broadway? 7, 8, 10 years, something? I don't know, maybe longer. So,
but definitely they wanted to make more kinds of like it.
They sure did. Yeah, all kinds of jukebox musicals. I can't even list them, but where they create a plot out of these songs. Now, Ain't Misbehavin' to me is not a jukebox musical. It's a review of Fats Waller songs, but it's not a story. But well, it got Hard Day's Night was a movie in what, 60s or something, and they kind of created a story around these Beatles songs. And so it's an old trope, it's an old thing that's been done, but there was a lot of it. And we'll probably see more of it. I'm not a huge fan of it, but I did like Mamma Mia. Have to go on record saying it, so.
Well, I wasn't looking at like, well, not necessarily jukebox musicals. I was also like student like Mean Girls and what else? Like really definitely from movies and put on. But where I was thinking like, was Schurk even like
Schurk, yeah.
Schurk was the definitely.
Yeah, well, Beauty and the Beast was a movie before it was a musical, I think, and Aladdin.
Right.
You know, Robin Williams. That was the Disney world. That's huge. The Disney.
Well,
world.
yeah. Well, there's definitely Disneyfication.
That's what happened to Times Square. You know,
Right,
I like it
definitely.
better. Yeah, I like it better. I'm one of the people who actually like it better now, but I could do without people like Elmo and the Naked Cowboy, but whatever. It's gotta be, I suppose. I just don't want Elmo to be naked. I don't need that.
But in spite of all that, Come From Away has been both critically and financially a success. It's had had national tour. Why do you think, in the midst of everything you've been describing about the changes on Broadway, why do you think Come From Away has been so successful and has kind of found its audience?
Whew. There's probably a lot more to it than I'll say, but I think it's an uplifting story about a terrible time and everyone's memory. That, like I said earlier, everyone goes into that theater with their own narrative. They've already written the exposition of the musical. They have it. It was terrible. We were attacked, lives lost, buildings crushed, planes, just devastation. And then to see that these people that they've never heard of took in all of these 7,000 passengers. To me, there's something about that altruism that the Good Samaritan, it's a Good Samaritan story. It's like, oh, right, I forgot. I have that. Oh, I'm a human being. Oh, I have that. I feel like it reawakens the possibility for goodness in all people who see it. They remember when they were good, when they helped someone out. We've all done it, and hopefully we'll do it again. Just little things. And I think that's partly what it is about the show. That I mentioned a few things there, but that it's about generosity and goodness, and that we want to believe we're that people. Do you know what I mean? That's my rising sign. I want to believe I'm good. That's kind of the Jungian thing. It's like I project my goodness onto others who are good and go, yeah, I'm like that, or I want to be like that. And I think it's just written and staged incredibly well. And again, the humor of it disarms you. And the music is great. It's just there's a lot to love about it. So I don't know. I could go on, but that's it. Yeah.
So okay, back to you. So can you discuss how it is in the social sciences that there's this focus on only the people at the center of the story of like a historical event are the ones that matter, and it sort of erases everybody else who's interconnected. Because we've been talking about like how we are interconnected, but when history happens, history talks about like the like 0.0 and not anything that surrounds it.
Well, I think in a lot of ways, 9/11 is a huge event in challenging some of those traditional takes, because we're talking about in many ways the first major event of the internet age, first major historical event that so many of us encountered in some way online. One person studying the immediate aftermath was looking at if we're telling the traditional story of a historical event, we'll look at the newspaper accounts. We'll look at maybe for more modern ones, there might be footage. We might look at the news broadcasts and see how they're reacting. But one historian looking at it said, okay, well, looking at texts, emails, other like message boards, other ways that people were communicating and processing it in real time as it's happening, and then afterwards, suddenly hundreds of millions of people are a part of this process, not just in the United States, but across the world. That I think within the day or two after 9/11, there were more than 33 million email exchanges in this country with people overseas about what was happening. There were more than 100 million text and bulletin board messages on 9/11 of people trying to find information of, is this person okay? Have you heard from that person yet? For me, as we try to process, well, how do you make sense of that much information? How do you take all of those stories and distill them down into something that you can tell easily? It's always a challenge. I think the where that is pushing historians and social scientists is to maybe think of new ways of documenting this, that maybe it can't just be a standard book that you pick up and, okay, that's your definitive history. Think of recent efforts to document the internet age. Think of the Library of Congress, for example, trying to collect tweets and create a record of them that we can use in the future. Think of even companies now that you can pay them, okay, give me everything you've got for this search term in this date range. It's giving us new ways to think of how everyday people are interacting with this, how they're responding as something happens, and then how are people responding to them? And when we start thinking of how do you start to tell that story, I think it opens us up to be a lot more creative. And I think it's going to ultimately force us to start drawing on pop culture, on forms of entertainment, to think of really how do you do this as storytelling, not simply as social science, not simply as humanity. How do you really do this in ways that draw back on folktale and folklore? How do you do it in ways that draw on drama in order to really present a holistic approach to this?
I think you're right. I think there's history that People can write about this happened, such and so said this, and all, like you said, tweets and emails, etc. But then an artist can distill it down into a performance of some kind, whether it's an opera, a musical, a poem, a book, but it's art and it captures a feeling of the time. To me, that's what an artist does. Like John Adams on the Transmigration of Souls. I don't know if you know John Adams, composer. It's about 9/11. You should.
Yeah.
It's a glorious like oratorio. It's called On the Transmigration of Souls. I've listened to it a few times, but every time I'm just like devastated by it. Meaning he distilled 9/11 to me down into something that's just chilling and sad. Because there's the facts, like you said, Tom, so beautifully that I could never come close to reiterating. There's all of that, but then there's also over here, the artist, how they can distill it into something that makes us go, oh, what it must have been to be alive at that time, to have gone through that, to have lost someone on that day. Whew. You have to hear On the Transmigration of Souls. Anyway, that's the beauty of art, and I'm so lucky to be a part of the artist's world and to be in Come From Away, which is its own distillation of that time, that day, or it was really like 4 or 5 days. The thing takes place over 5 days, and then 10 years later, when everyone goes back for the 10-year reunion in 2011. It's really a fascinating thing, and it's the digital age. You're right. It's like internet. It's all changed how history will record it and how we experience it. It's digital now.
So yeah, basically, in connection to all of that, like I said, my day of 9/11 was pretty boring. It was everybody else I was attached to. I had family members who worked in New York and lived in New Jersey and were stranded.
Wow.
A friend who worked at the Trade Center, he just didn't go into work that day because he had a dentist appointment.
Yeah.
But he ended up being a listener to a coworker who actually was there during the day and on the spot. And so yeah. It's just, and so somebody, a friend of the family, she knew everybody on the American Airlines because she worked in Boston. So she knew the people who died there. It's not me as a center point, but it's me as in relation to other people.
Sure, absolutely. Well said. Yes,
Yeah.
it's, destiny is understanding destiny and how that person had a dentist appointment that Tuesday morning. You know, the blessing of having a cavity. I talked to a man who was the head chef of Windows on the World, and he lost all of his colleagues that day. And I said, and why were you not there? And he said, I had an eye doctor appointment that morning. He said, I needed reading glasses. That's the way I remember it. And I said, the blessing, I not to be, insensitive, but the blessings of your eyes going at age 40 or whatever it was. And yeah, it's if you try to wade into that, trying to understand destiny, and I lost a college friend who was in the North Tower that day. It's like, try to understand how she ended up having a job there and I didn't. And well, what? Yeah, I can only go up, like, I'm a terrible chess player. I can only go about 2 moves and I go, well, I don't know if I'm going to lose the game with this, but if I go here, he'll probably go there. And that's all I got. I'm just terrible at understanding destiny, but to me, it's sacred and fascinating. Hey, we got to talk about your wedding at some point. I don't want to run out of time. Am I interrupting your chain? Your
No. Like, well, no. That's how I think about my wedding. It's like everybody I was attached to. Like I had a friend. She's Sikh, but in the aftermath of 9/11, Sikh people were getting attacked as well as Muslim people, and sometimes people would get her for being Mexicans, so she'd go hola during like post 9/11. She would just be like hola. She like rolled into
Oh no.
where she would usually like contradict people, and though she was okay during 9/11, certain kinds of like Muslim attitudes ended up happening in Wisconsin. That's where like a close friend of her family ended up being killed. So it was weird kind of connections that lead from one point of history to another.
Yes.
Came out of our wedding, for me at least. That's how I saw it.
Yeah, she became a doctor, and then she was practicing in Wisconsin. Her dad came out to visit her there because his friend was one of the ones who, when the Gurdwara was attacked in Wisconsin by a gunman who thought he was attacking Muslims, his friend was one of the ones who attacked the attacker to try to stop him and gave up his own life that day. And to think that was just the residual effect of the events leading up to our wedding, it makes it very strange for us, I think, to think about. Like, we're coming up, we're going to be celebrating our 20th wedding anniversary. It's weird every year when you think, you start hearing the stories, hey, we're coming up on the anniversary of 9/11 and this is going to be taking place. And then it hits your head, oh, wait, we've got to talk about where are we going to go to dinner? Or what are we going to do for our wedding anniversary? It's so weird to make that connection. That's this great and joyful event. It's no matter how you paint it, it ends up in some way getting marred by the larger context of that week.
Will forever be tied to that day, for that event.
And the weird thing is that at that time, though, it was like a break. I had a Jewish coworker, and he went to the religious part of the ceremony, which I was kind of not expecting him to go to. But then he thanked me. He's like, "Thank you. We needed this." It was like, "Okay, you're welcome."
So many people. That was what I heard more than. Actually, that was the second most common thing I heard at the reception was "Thank you. This is what we needed this week. We needed a chance to just unwind and have a good meal and have some drinks and dance and celebrate and have happy about."
Well, yes, Tom, that, and also see two lovely young people come together and say, we're creating something good here that we believe in. It's a coming together where we're after 5 days before, what was it? We saw the world torn apart. 4 days, right?
15? 4 days. Yeah.
Oh, come on. That's insane.
Yeah, the only thing I heard more than that was, are you two going on your honeymoon? And like, if the plane leaves, yes, we're going on our honeymoon.
Where did you go?
London and Madrid.
Oh,
perfect. Nothing is more surreal than being in a subway in Spain and seeing the towers fall because they had a video of it.
They had the TVs in there with the news broadcasts, and it was surreal, and even more so in retrospect because of the subsequent events, the bombings later in London and in Madrid.
Yes.
That it ends up tying everything together. No connection. We have alibis.
But yeah.
But even when we're in London, as really the fallout is settling in. We're in London when we first start hearing the public leaders in America say you're either with us or against us, and you start seeing which direction everything's going to go, and that sinking feeling really sets in. But then you hear that, and you're frustrated one way. There's one night we were sitting down, I think we were in an Indian restaurant, and we're having dinner, and there was a group of younger folks nearby who were talking about what had happened in New York, and so they started talking as if, oh, they're making it all about themselves, as if this is a huge deal, and blah blah blah. If this happened in London, we wouldn't react that way. And there's that moment of defensiveness where what really wanted to stop, what are you talking about? Like, we don't know the death toll yet. We know that a lot of people have died. Yeah, this is kind of a big deal. I felt like turning around and saying, well, if somebody had flown that plane in
Ben or to the Parliament, 10 Downing Street, how would you feel?
Exactly. And but I just kind of caught myself like,
Yeah.
we're here to enjoy a night's dinner. Let's back to this.
10 Downing Street. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Sometimes I thought that back then. Are we overreacting? Are Americans overreacting? Are we being big babies and you're either with us or you're against us? And then going into Afghanistan, I get it. Nah, that's another subject now, 20 years later, and we just finally got out. It's so complicated. But I remember also feeling that I was kind of enraged. It's like, I felt like I'll put on my boots, I'll go fight. He's like, what, who's saying this in my head? You know, I was 46 years old. What? I'm going to go somewhere with a gun and kill people? No. Anyway, yeah, what a time. It brought up so many conflicting feelings in me and probably many of us. So
one of the great ironies, though, is we actually got the reception we wanted, oddly, because of 9/11.
what do you mean, the reception?
We were in a fight through part of that summer with the person who owned the reception site. He was trying to shove us into a smaller room so he could basically have a huge rave going on in the main ballroom and get 2 days. Was it 2 days after 9/11? We came home from some errands. There's a message on the telephone from the owner. We were suddenly his only business for the entire weekend, and suddenly he was very nice.
Yeah.
Oh, I know there was a little misunderstanding before, but hey, you've got the main ballroom, everything you want. You're the only business that night. Yeah, we're going to take care of you. That night, he gave us like an extra half hour for free. He's like, oh, don't worry about it. You stay. And he suddenly it changed his tune. And it's another one of those things where it's odd that what this huge disaster is happening. It was in Elizabeth that we had the reception. So just up the road in New York City, there's this huge, we're still looking for survivors. And because of that, he is being nicer to us. It is that connect in your head as you try to make sense of it. It's so weird.
Yeah, well, like I said, and you just pointed out, I think that Good Samaritan arose in many people, not just in Gander. People in New York City were nicer. You could talk to people. You remember how people were especially kind and kind of tender with each other? And it's true. And I think it changed New York actually for the better in many ways, that I can still see it. I know that there's a song that I've always wanted to write. There it is. It's like, I still see it 20 years later. There's kindness where there might not have been, that someone had to really cross us and really did. And so I'm glad you got that extra half hour.
Well, I was going to say, you called Trin that week regarding the music, and you were going to be singing in the ceremony, but you were also going to be singing at the reception. And you called asking if it was okay to use the sheet music for her entrance song, because you had given blood. You'd stood in line with so many other blood, and you said you were feeling a little lightheaded and wanted to make sure it was okay. Like, of course, Jim, it's okay.
I don't remember what song was it. I probably didn't know the song.
It was No Nobis Domine.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The fifth.
I probably didn't really know it well enough. And I think I sang Not a Day Goes By. Didn't I sing something?
At the reception. At the reception you did.
But there was the sound equipment didn't work.
Nope, the tape didn't work for whatever reason, and you did it a cappella, and you did a gorgeous job.
I remember, I thought, no, I'll do it a cappella. I remember you was going, really? You'll do that? Yeah, whatever. But anyway, that's what I remember. I didn't even remember singing for your entrance, Trinidad, but that makes total sense. Yeah, what a time. I don't really have a lot of memories from your wedding, sadly, because it's just like that time was just, I remembered traveling to New Jersey. I was also doing a show at Paper Mill at that time, around that time. And we would take a bus and we could look back and we could still see smoke coming up. When I went to rehearsals, I could still see smoldering from Ground Zero across the river, going to Milburn, New Jersey, to Paper Mill. Paper Mill? Yeah.
Yeah.
that crazy? Was that crazy for you? You were working?
No, that was 99. I think it was Red Hot and Blue.
Okay.
A show called Red Hot and Blue, or Annie, but I think it was Red Hot and Blue, which is an old Cole Porter musical. Like a wannabe anything goes. It's good, but it's not anything goes. Sorry, Cole. But anyway, surreal.
I think that whole time period is going to be like, meanwhile, like there's the everyday that's sort of enveloped with like the historical events that keeps unfolding in like some weird omelet.
Yeah, it's so many stories as there are every day. I walk around my neighborhood that I've lived in for 40 years and I think, this is the world. And I think, no, this is just a narrow sliver of just Manhattan. What's happening on the Upper East Side right now? What's happening in Wall Street? What's happening in East Harlem right now? What's happening in the Bronx, in Brooklyn? There are so many lives and so many dramas being played out. And it's so easy to just be suckered into, well, I'm just here in my neighborhood and there's my dry cleaner and that's where I do my laundry. And there's that guy who always asks me for money. And I don't know, it can be a narrow view. And I almost every day I go, Jim, this is just your little world. So a lot of micro stories out there.
I think between pop culture, theater, history, that's a way to encapsulate them and try to sort of make sense of things and have something for us to work with.
Yeah, well, it's hard to make sense of it all, Thank God we fall asleep at the end of the day and we just can't take it anymore and our brains just go to dreamland and we forget about it. It's all obliterated. And then the next day we wake up and try to figure it all out again. And but I love my life. I'm lucky to still be here and to have friends like you who go so far back and to even have memories that are terribly bittersweet and tragic like 9/11. And it's an invitation for growth, I always say, an invitation to discover more about myself and what makes me who I am and what makes the world the way it is. I don't know, I try to look at it positively because that's all that we can do, really. Hard to do, but anyway.
Anything to tie this up?
Yeah, Tom, ties up.
I was going to ask you to do that.
No,
Well, no, I was actually, in terms of tying up, I was thinking of your point, Jim, about how we can kind of get so involved in our little sliver of the world, we mistake that for the world. And one of the things I love about Come From Away is the variety of stories that it does tell.
absolutely.
People from all over the world. It deals with some of the differences that arise and then the tensions coming from that. I was going to ask you, Trin, in terms of the pop culture perspective on this. Sorry for those lights. It's on an automatic timer, so.
Office Depot, doggone them.
Thank you.
Oh, crap.
There you go.
Okay.
Wow, it's like a rock show. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask Trin, is there anything else you want to add in terms of the pop culture post 9/11, how it was dealing with the fallout along different identity lines, whether it's religion, whether it's race, gender? I know it's a huge question to end on, but
I think it took us like at least 10 years out of 9/11 to sort of branch out again in terms of because of the rollback. I think there was in terms of race and gender. Weirdly, I think sexuality has been it was going on its own track and in some ways was progressing a lot better than certain things, just from looking at college students and how their perspectives are. Sexuality is kind of something that they've been more progressive about than anything else.
Yeah.
And that's looking at students who are from a rural area in the Midwest.
Sure.
So that's I think
That's wonderful. Hey, sex is a very strong force, and people have to figure that out, man. So it's
Yeah.
it's great what's happened in that realm.
Well, I mean, we took the youth theater group to the national tour of Come From Away, and we were laughing at the Kevin story, and then finding like that everybody was gay in this area of Canada.
Get up the gay.
They're post 9/11 babies. They don't have that lynch thing.
Stigma, yeah.
There was a connect to them, so I think that in some ways that there's something that can connect back.
I hadn't really thought about us bringing this youth group to go see that. I hadn't thought of it in terms of that. I think that's a huge point. It also does highlight the age differences and how it was being perceived in the audience that night. For those of us who have those very strong memories of 9/11, we all do bring that baggage to the show. For the younger ones, for some of them, this is their schooling in 9/11.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
For so many of them, their social studies classes, if they're lucky, might end with 9/11.
Sure.
And the immediate aftermath. The way that when I was growing up, we were lucky if we got to the end of the Vietnam War.
Sure.
I mean, so during the time of 9/11, I worked for a boss who was older, and he brought me into his office one day, and he's like, "Guess what is today?" And I was like, "The day Kennedy was shot." And he's like, "Yes." And then he's like, "Okay, that's it. I just wanted you to know." Like, I feel like for us, like that was 9/11, but
sure, yeah.
I won't do that to a younger child.
No.
but that kind of a thing. Where were you? Obviously.
Yeah. November 22nd, 1963. I was in third grade. Yeah, I remember that. I'm old enough to remember that. And I don't go back to Pearl Harbor, thank you. But, that was, every generation pretty much has one, I guess, or pretty much. And 9/11 is huge, huge. But yeah, it's what a history lesson the show is. You're right, Tom.
And it's a way that makes history accessible. And
Yeah.
I think that's what pop culture is how people sort of what is in culture at the time and how they relate to it,
Mm-hmm.
how they process it. And so the creators of this processed it in this way by focusing on gathering these certain stories, and then using that musical, it gives us something to work with as an audience as well, especially those of us who live through it. So I think, that kind of.
Oh no, it's wonderful. It's history should be interesting to study in school. I liked history when I was in high school, but most people didn't. Math didn't really interest me, meaning I wish teachers had a way to make math interesting, history interesting, English interesting. To the passion of the teacher can drag a student along, but if the teacher isn't passionate about it, I'm out of luck. And that's partially why I'm in the arts. My music teacher, voice teacher, director, everything, he was extraordinarily passionate about it, and you could not be in his presence without feeling it yourself. That's why I'm in the arts. But if my math teacher had been that passionate, I wouldn't be surprised if I'd be a scientist right now. It's so true. It's a shame that we can't make all those subjects more fascinating and exciting to learn. And that's partially what I love about Come From Away, is it is a history lesson. And to me, it's entertaining as hell. So I'm very lucky, again, to be a part of it. So.
I think time-wise, that's
yeah,
probably a good chance for us to start wrapping up. So we're going to stop the recording. But Jim, thank you so much for being part of this.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Trinidad. It was a pleasure talking to you and hearing your points of view. You're both so bright. It's kind of sobering and humbling.
And for everyone watching, thank you so much for participating with us.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and I think this falls well within Wayne State was trying to do with their conference, and since we are talking about in terms of disruption and history and pop culture. So